Hello, everybody, and happy January. So, this year, I'm trying something a little different for my audio essays. I am revisiting my 2024 essays, doing some revisions to them, or at least revisiting the thoughts and tossing them back around in my brain. And in order to toss them back around really expertly and well, I decided to ask my good friend Rach Hunt of Ariel Canvas if she would be willing to come in and read my essays, write some responses to them, and then have some conversations with me about the ideas in them. Rach and I have become great friends over the past 2 or 3 years, and she's a real thought partner around things like pedagogical approach, what it means to coach. She comes from an incredible background in competitive gymnastics and a career with Cirque du Soleil, and is an incredible teacher in her own right and doing her own thing. And so this month we sat down to talk about my January 2024 essay, which you can read or you can go back and listen to in my podcast thread. And she wrote a response, and I read a response, which I thought was great. And we decided to have a conversation about it. So you're about to hear that conversation, and let me know what you think at the end. You should go check her out on Instagram. She's Ariel Canvas. You can check her out on YouTube, Ariel Canvas online as well. Enjoy this listen and this amazing conversation. Okay, we're recording and now we have to start. Do we want to do any sort of place setting or like intro or anything for ourselves?
Well, I sort of thought a really nice way to keep it short and sharp is just like, where are you right now sort of thing. Or you could ask me what I had for breakfast. Hey, Adam. So what
Right.
I had for breakfast was a hash brown and 2 fried eggs. What did you have for dinner?
I have not had dinner yet. Today, I had biscuits. We're in a snow day. So I had biscuits and bacon and like a little roast beef sandwich. And we're like about to hit dinner time. What have you done so far today?
I've had a hash brown and 2 eggs. And I've taught one of my students from Plant City, Tampa, Florida. And it's almost as if you live on the opposite side of the planet.
It's almost as if I'm on the opposite side of the planet. So we're looking at the essay that I wrote in January 2024, and we're going through and looking at your responses to it. And we have been friends for like 2 years now after meeting online, and we have such like great thoughts and conversations about some of the ideas of these in like the essays I write, and now in like the responses you write to my essays.
Because I'm that person. I'm that person that writes written responses.
Yes.
Letter to the.
Yes. I love it. So what background do we want to give anyone who is listening who we don't know?
Literally, chronological timeline would be ballet, because my mum was a ballet dancer and I was like drawn to it. Found that too boring. Gymnastics. Got picked up really early by like a rural talent scout who just probably noticed my hypermobility. And then straight into the Victorian Institute of Sport, which was a like pre-elite training program, straight into training for Sydney 2000 Olympics. Final year of that, again, got talent scout recruited for my hypermobility and general discipline and conscientiousness of an athlete by Cirque du Soleil. Auditioned for Cirque, got onto the database, went to the headquarters in Montreal, did 2 separate formations, which is like their training camp. Broke my back, had a whole bunch of lessons around physiotherapy and why I might be interested in that. Went to Vegas, lived in Vegas for 4 years, did a contract with Cirque the first time, came home, physiotherapy degree, met my husband. He got a contract on a Cirque du Soleil show called Lucia. And then I went back on tour with him and had a second stint with the shiny 9 to 5 of Circus. And that was when I really started developing Ariel Canvas online, because I wanted a way to stay in touch with my students back home whilst I was a WAG. Like technically I was just a wife and girlfriend on tour. And then I was made redundant because of the pandemic, came home, reassessed life. I would like to say that I was like one of the OG sort of digital creators for Ariel content online, rode that roller coaster. And recently last year relocated to the country. I now live in Echuca, Victoria, which is by the river. And I have my own little studio space here, which is gorgeous. I teach predominantly online, and I am amateur philosopher. I am lifelong lover of learning. I identify more as a teacher than I ever did as a performer, but I'm a movement educator now, which is, I think, where we met, and then that's why we clicked. And I enjoy playing devil to your advocate.
Well, and I think the thing I love most about the way that you identify now is like, man, you really did the performer thing in a way that I never really did. Like you were with Cirque du Soleil, you were like a competitive gymnast. Like I never achieved those levels of things. For all my sort of natural ability as a coach or as a speaker or as a writer or any of those things, I was not great at circus myself. I've always been really good at teaching people, but I never was that good. I auditioned for Cirque Oise. I auditioned for Cirque. I got some contracts when I was living in New York. Like I did some performing, but it was all in like 2007 to 2011 when you didn't really have to be all that good to get work, to be honest. Like you had to do stuff, right? Like I would never never be able to get real work today. And it's so interesting to think about like those changes that have happened over the last 10 or 15 years. And I feel like that's one of the starting places where we felt like these two essays that we wrote started to like connect with each other. Was like, wow, okay, I really started coaching and doing and performing circus in like 2007, 8 kind of zone. And what were you doing in like 2008, 2009?
So I came home to start my physio degree like April 2006. So I would have been like mid-degree, very much like I'm learning everything from a textbook, and I'm going to be a sports physiotherapist, and performing is behind me at the ripe old age of 20, whatever I was, 5.
Right, 20 something. Right. So you'd already been with Cirque du Soleil by the time that we all got like YouTube and Instagram and like phones.
Adam,
like,
when I first joined Cirque du Soleil, Hotmail was the thing. Facebook didn't exist. Instagram didn't exist. And I'm so jealous nowadays that, I mean, I have a few photo shoots, some very cool photo shoots, and a little bit of footage that has seeped out over the years onto YouTube. So I can show people what I used to do when I performed at the Bellagio in Vegas, and that water show that is iconic for Cirque du Soleil. But I'm jealous that other people can just like post their training like it's nothing, because I have just this lived experience of it.
Well, and that's one of the things that I find so fascinating when I think back on my early days of even finding circus training or thinking about circus training. It was the early days of the internet, no Instagram, no Facebook, and the ways in which it was the Wild West, like for good, and the ways in which it was the Wild West, like for bad, you know? And
Nuance,
like,
I'll say, look, we lasted 10 minutes without talking about nuance.
yeah, we made it through biographies without talking out of both sides of our mouth at the same time. So I'm going to read for just a moment from something you wrote in response to some of the things I was talking about, which is you've observed the popularization of aerial as both a hobby and a creative career pursuit. But it would be remiss not to mention that you personally contributed to some aspects of the Australian industry for aerials that you now dislike the most. And then you cite this 8-level syllabus that you created for a circus fitness franchise, and thinking about kind of the 2020s. And for me, thinking even before that is kind of like, we've really witnessed the change from when we started, where it was like, here's a set of silks, or here's a sling, or here's a lyra. And the only way that you have to relate to this apparatus is things that you can come up with on your own. A Cirque du Soleil DVD. They've very intentionally kind of done the framing and the cuts so you can't quite see like how the wraps actually happen, you know?
Yeah.
Or you like go to a festival or find a real life person. There was maybe one book, maybe two that were printed. And so I always think to myself, kind of like, okay, the Wild Wild West was probably not the greatest, but where we find ourselves today is also probably a bit too much. And so I'm just interested to hear, like, how is your perspective on how we teach aerial now that teaching is kind of a profession that could exist here? We can talk about that too. But like, what are the things we did wrong over the last 10 or 15 years as an industry or as individuals? And what are the things we did right over the last 10 or 15 years as an industry or as individuals?
Okay, file under propaganda I fell for. So every story, like every hero's got their like Genesis story, right? And I think for me, yeah, like even just starting from the fact that in my early 20s, Cirque du Soleil, I left and went to do, like I did my last year of high school overseas. I basically was like, this is an opportunity. I don't know what Cirque du Soleil is. So to be able to say, been there, done that, Cirque du Soleil, before life had even started. Like most people work their entire lives to get a chance to get into something like Cirque du Soleil. It's not everyone's dream, but it's a thing. It's a standard for the industry. And I had done it. Even when I met my husband, like he jokes because you're so flippant about your, but when I left, it was not a household name. When I went to go to school and they were like, you're running away to be a circus, like a clown? What's going on?
Right.
So I also witnessed the golden ages of Cirque in that time, from 2003 to 2006, let's say. And I was young. So coming back to learning my first silks lesson, which was by a French teacher here in Melbourne, Australia, Helene, and I stupidly was like, oh yeah, I speak French, because I've just been to Cirque du Soleil. And she was like, great. She taught me in French. So she taught me tissu in French, and I was like, I have wildly overestimated my understanding of this language. This was a stupid thing to pretend I could do adequately. But that was part of that culture. The traditional circus culture was that the National Institute would get experts. We had a Chinese pole expert, and we had a French tissu expert, and that was where the traditions got passed down. And I did all of 4 classes before she told me I could go gig. So yes, I've had corporate gigs, I've had carny gigs, I've done Spiegel tent tours, I've created my own shows, I've had all that like performing sort of experience. So a lot of what I brought to when I started off into the sort of the health and fitness industry, where I branded those 8 levels of curriculum for a circus fitness franchise, and learnt all of my own lessons about intellectual property and all of that fun stuff. I had a real error that I kind of fell for that propaganda that this is accessible, anyone can do it, and we've just got to standardize the heck out of it, and then anyone can do it, and sort of the rest is history. So yeah, a lot of the things that I rail against the most vehemently, I will absolutely go, yeah, I can do that because this isn't theory for me. I had a part in creating it. And
Yeah. Well, and the standardization is so interesting because definitely one of the things that was true when I started learning and teaching specifically aerials, and we're going to kind of talk more specifically about aerials than I sometimes talk, like, because I am an aerialist. I was an aerialist. I teach a lot of fabric. I've taught a lot of rope. I've taught, like some bits and pieces of straps as straps were getting started and getting bigger. And one of the things that I think is really true is in the early 2000s, anyone who was teaching these skills was primarily either a dancer or a performer who was either retired or who was off contract. I remember really specifically some of the teachers that I sought out here in the States were people that I saw early YouTube videos of them. Like one of the things that happened for me was it was like 2010, YouTube was just getting started. I had just finished my rope act, my first real rope act, and I got some really good footage of it that was like meant to be kind of a video piece instead of like an audition piece or a sizzle reel or an audition reel. And I put it up on YouTube, and within a year had something like 12,000 views or 14,000 views in like 2010, right? And this was like this was wild to me and everyone. And like people would in circus spaces, people would be like, oh yeah, I saw this video. Like no one was recognizing that circus could be put on video and on YouTube as easily as we were all kind of starting to do it then. Some of the other Americans at this time, like Terry Crane and Shayna Swanson and Kendrick Reeves, we were all starting to kind of put some, specifically rope, up on YouTube. And the piece of that was really interesting to me, because I wasn't doing much research on YouTube. There wasn't enough on there to like go and look at people's tricks or take people's tricks. Everything was still pretty either taken from a coach and then changed into what I wanted it to be changed into, or invented, just straight invented by someone in rope. And then you either teach it to someone else, which is like, oh yeah, you live on the other side of the country, it's okay for me to teach you this thing. Or like, no, I'm actually not going to teach you that. Like if you can figure it out, go for it. But like, that's not something you get to see. And there was very little, the extent to which circus or aerial was recreational in the way that I would say it's recreational today, like did not really exist. There was no kind of like sense of progression. There was no sense of how, the way we teach a hip key is like, here's a hip key, now go try it. And that's what you would have to do. Sling was not widely used at all. Like everyone started on trapeze or rope. And so like the standardization, if what standardization has bought us is a sense of how to progress through these skills, or a sense of how to keep various athletic abilities like safe and interested in engaging in the crafts of aerials, then like I'm all for those things. Those things seem really good to me. But where standardization starts to fall apart for me is in this idea sort of that like some of the tricks or skills that we learn or like to teach have somehow become like crystallized. And in like crystallizing them, it's kind of like, oh, a crossback straddle is a level 2 trick, and it's done like this and this and this and this and this. And it must be done this way in order to be like somehow correct. At some point on the line, someone decided that there were like right and wrong ways to do some of these tricks. And I don't know who it was. I don't think it was one person, but that message started to exist in the world. What was your impression? Because you come from competitive gymnastics, where there is, in fact, like a right and a wrong way to do something at competition, because those things have been really solidly agreed upon by like international competitive bodies, right? But what was your experience moving from that into aerials and then watching kind of what's changed or happened in aerials? How's your mindset around that evolved or changed, or like?
I always see my gymnastics career, especially competitions, as a gateway to discovering that I was a performer, and then my performance career as a gateway to understanding that I actually loved process. I was super oriented to the now and the interaction. And to Cirque's credit, yes, they recruit worldwide athletes, cliff divers from Cuba and I literally auditioned my bar routine to become a flyer for Cirque in Australia. The reason they do that is to bring people to their headquarters and then give them a heavy dose of virtuosity, excellence, performance, artistry. We did voice classes, we did acting classes. So I took from that what I needed at that time to fall in love with teaching, came home, got my degree in teaching, basically physiotherapy, and then use it now in a teaching way. And then my teaching practice has been a journey to accepting my real identity, which I believe is I'm an artist. So it took me 15 years to realize from being a gymnast that I'm actually an artist. And that one of the ways that I have a practice as an artist is teaching. And then I have a movement practice as an artist on the apparatuses myself. So coming from competitions, which I now feel strongly about, in the aerial world, it sort of gave me this, I have a love of syllabus, I have a love of structure. I do believe that structure lends itself to creativity and it has its place. And I have opinions about the coding of movement. And I learned a lot of things in my gymnastics career that we would now, I think you refer to them as like soft skills, which I always think is a bit of an oxymoron because it's such an imperative skill to have these soft skills. Yeah. It's like you
soft
say that
implies optional in a way that it really shouldn't.
It infers that there's hard skills. And as soon as I think we focus on like hard, Then we have like harder and hardest. And I'm a linguophile, so I think language communicates so much about what we're actually taking up in our bodies when we move. But that kind of, when competition seeps into movement, so does gatekeeping of movement and teaching. And so does consumption and comparison so for me, competitions don't have a healthy place. But I see what they provide. I'm very able to silver line. I can silver line the crap out of anything because I'm so used to seeing things from different places. But yeah, the discipline, the conscientiousness, the dedication, the self-awareness, and the ability to reflect on my own practice as a gymnast, those were the soft skills that actually made me pick up aerial arts very quickly. And what I've had to learn the hard way or the long way or the process-oriented way or the detailed way is all the other skills needed to actually teach movement and to engage in movement and develop my own idiolect and actually to help people access their inner teacher. And movement is something anyone can teach themselves. It's in the practice. It's in the doing. The merit is in the doing. So yeah, the philosophy seeps in. All of those things that I have always been, it's like I've just had this journey of different movement languages. Gymnastics was my first language, my native language, or ballet, perhaps you could say. And that was a great foundation. Does that mean everyone has to do ballet if they want to do aerials? Absolutely not. But as I take on new languages, it's not that I become whatever it's called, a polyglot. It's that I become more me. I discard anything that's not me. So when we as teachers want to encourage creativity in our students, or make it accessible or sustainable, what we're actually saying is the more of this that you can take on that is your movement, the longer you'll be able to do it, the more joy you'll be able to access. And that is so different from ex-Olympic level gymnast and
Yeah.
it's a very hard reputation to eliminate, actually.
Yeah. Well, that wraps me into, because I since we're going to be talking throughout the year, it wraps me into one of the things that is my favorite part about what I wrote in this essay. When I came back to look at my essay again, I was like,
a great essay. When you look back on it, you're like, this was good.
Yeah, every once in a while I write something that I'm like, ooh, I quite like this. It's quite fun to have this come back up in my brain and to think about it again. So the thing that is very close and that I want to relate for a moment to how we learn movement is one of the opening ideas in this essay is I write this, that I experience two distinct forms of learning. In one of them, someone articulates something that I already knew or that I already feel like I understood or that was already kind of a part of my world, but that I'd never heard articulated well or in the way that the person articulated it. The second kind of learning that I experience is more like discovery, is like real discovery. This is a piece of knowledge or this is a piece of understanding or a piece of articulation that I didn't already have. This is something that isn't already a part of me or that is really truly new to me. And I mention that for kind of two reasons. One of them is that I'm interested in how that relates to movement and not just learning soft social skills or coaching skills or teaching skills, but like, what does it feel like to discover movement that was already inside you? Or what does it feel to discover movement that is actually really truly new to you, that actually feels unfamiliar or different or scary or like not a part of you in a way? So I'm interested on your take on how both those things relate to movement. In your essay, you write a little bit about invention and discovery and some of the interesting distinctions there. So like, how do those ideas about my experience of how I learn, which is I either articulate something I already knew or discover something wholly new, how do those relate to you, and how can we relate them to movement for people who might be listening?
Oh,
There's so much there. Sorry.
I metaphorically, figuratively, and literally leaned in. Can we narrow that down? I mean, like, I think we perceive learning movement, art forms, and other skills, other crafts As soon as you really start peeling the onion, you very quickly see that, like I call it, looking behind the magician's curtain. You very quickly see that there's an element of just sheer what we call repetition, but is really just practice, because it's pretty impossible to actually do the same thing twice. Like, have you ever tried to make your hair look the same? It doesn't happen.
God, we
for
can't
me,
talk about my hair. It's just, yeah.
we think that it's this linear and I assume, but also I know to be true, my journey as a student, which never ends, is that we think there's a certain amount of info that we need to like uptake, and then we think that at some point that will become learned knowledge, and then at some point we'll maybe start to develop our own style or access creativity, or maybe it's not for us, maybe we weren't born for it, so we stay in this lane. We have all these sort of things that we think lead to this like pure, like, I think of it as like a ladder, right? And as you go up, you sort of, the ladder stays the same, and if you can't get to the next rung, you can't get to the next rung. Whereas I feel like information is so available right now, and it's never been less important in a way, because like wisdom is knowledge applied. That's the saying, right? So and knowledge can be accessed from within. So the process of like accumulating skill, accumulating information until it hits, until it's bodily knowledge, it's literally just information. And the only information that is vital for you is the information that helps you, that elicits that response from your body, that helps you access that inner movement. So for me, invention, you know how I feel about this word invention. And I've so many stories about, Instagram etiquette and who invented this and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to get in the weeds too much about that. But the thing that bothers me about invention, and I say this in my response to your essay, is that it, as a word, invention, and discovery has a totally different connotation when it comes to like who has the knowledge, who owns the knowledge. And invention always feels to me like something that pulls me towards thinking about ownership. And that pulls me away from the process. And the analogy that I like to use is like, if you're an archaeologist and you go to a site and you're digging and you discover some ancient set of bones, did you invent bones?
Right.
Or did you do the digging? Are you the one
Right.
who did the digging? So I say to students, in your practice, if you're the one doing the digging and you discover something that's truly new for you, or you encounter the familiar in a new way, then it's a valid discovery for you every time. Whether or not bones have always existed isn't the point. So that's my take on invention versus discovery. It's not that I don't believe things were truly invented by certain people. I mean, Felix Cane, famously, hypermobile ex-rhythmic gymnast from Australia, invented the spatchcock, which is a move on pole where you look like a human skewered chicken, but it's always been a movement possibility. So I think that if your practice isn't allowing you to encounter and to visualize and to experience like sensually a movement possibility, then you are really selling yourself short for what humans can do, because like we did it. I studied gymnastics, but then I became a flyer for Cirque du Soleil. And then after that, I developed my own style of aerial that I think is very uniquely me. And it's still changing as I take on more languages and as I develop my idiolect. But none of that comes from watching other people's movement. It comes from my own practice.
And to me, it's so interesting to then pull in sort of one of the drums that I play all the time, which is that the movement practices like fabric or sling or trapeze or swinging trapeze, or the things that I teach, handstand or contortion, up until the last 20 years or so, all of those things were very firmly in the sort of anthropological family of being oral traditions, almost folk traditions, almost family traditions. When you think about, if we think about fabric in the United States, if you trace fabric back 20 years, we see within the last 20 years the diminishing of the number of people in fabric who know how to work the apparatus technically, and who are teaching other people and who are sharing that knowledge with other people. There was a
Mm.
time, if you go back 50 years, we begin to see like Spanish web and trapeze. This knowledge becomes much more folk tradition. It's more like, do you want to learn how to do you want to learn glass blowing? Right? We begin to see that the crafts of these things can be traced back in the same way that if you go back 400 years, you can trace back ballet to the Russian schools and the French schools and et cetera, et cetera. And if you continue to go further and further back, we have, I teach flexibility and contortion. And so one of the major influences, not the only influence, is the traditions of Mongolian contortion. Because when you're, a 20 something boy who wants to learn contortion in the United States in the early 2000s, that's me, then you end up inevitably with a Chinese or a Mongolian coach for a time, right?
Yeah.
And there are well-established traditional techniques that you are neither inventing nor discovering, but that you are instead sort of have a hand in evolving. If, for
Mm.
example, some of my teachers, if we thought of it as a story that they were telling me, we'd
Mm.
be able to say really clearly to ourselves, okay, this is a folk story. The folk story is, this is how you do a figure eight foot lock. You wrap the foot, you cross over the pinky toe and under the foot, right? And the way that we literally put language on how to teach that and the method that we use to teach it is literally part of an oral tradition that has been like communicated to me by my teachers and then from me to my students and then da 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 da. And we see around the 2010s, around the internet time, we begin to see these oral traditions being, I'm going to say what I feel, which is like hacked off by people, myself among them, who
Mm.
say the next step of this oral tradition is to give the oral tradition to the internet and to let it be in the hive mind, and that I will be the sort of like mouthpiece for all the knowledge that I've received to be put into the interwebs. And so what is our relation? How has that changed our relationship to invention and discovery? How is the way that we hold or don't hold the traditions of competitive gymnastics, of pole, of fabric, of trapeze? How has our decisions to engage with the internet, to let these traditions exist, not just person to person, but also in a less held way, like change the trajectories of those traditions? That's a big question that I don't know the answer to, but I hear it in some of the things that you're beginning to point at is like, what
Yeah.
is what is Instagram etiquette, etc.
Oh, I mean, the only Instagram etiquette thing that really matters to me is what do you think you're saying when you say this is inspired by? And the only reason for saying that, I don't care if you tag me. I don't think I've ever truly because language matters the most to me, right? And we now know that all words are made up. We now know that the dictionary is getting bigger, not smaller, and yet society acts as if we are refining a language, not expanding it. And I think the focus of the internet has become mastery. I mean, masterclass.com, you talk about wanting to learn glass blowing. The first thing that popped into my head today, if I wanted to try to learn glass blowing, I'd see if they offer it on Masterclass, probably, or a local
Yeah,
class.
yeah,
Everything is a transaction. Everything can be consumed or purchased, rather than, I think, the focus of previous art forms, including competitive ones and traditions like Mongolian contortionists, who, by the way, I worked with 4 contortionists from Mongolia in O, and they had a really cool belief that you never submerge the body in water. So they didn't shower because that's what they thought kept their backs bendy.
fascinating.
Fascinating. Yeah, they didn't shower with us, and they never submerged themselves in water, particularly cold water. That was their belief. But right, so
Right.
even from gymnastics and all of these strict disciplines, the focus wasn't on invention or discovery, it was on mastery. But from pursuing mastery through a practice, that did lead to invention, and that did definitely lead to discovery. And then I guess it's up to the individual how artistically minded you are, or how soulful you are, or how much it sort of stokes your curiosity than what your practice lends itself to. With the sort of, I think, start of the internet, the focus became on absolute like proliferation of information, and that has led to some really cool stuff. I mean, without the internet, I probably wouldn't have never discovered the language of pole dancing, and that was sort of my gateway to other forms of language, second languages, third languages, fourth languages that I only really wanted to learn a couple of words in, but it's really cool to like break out when you're in a certain environment. You know, the
Yeah.
analogy extends so far, and I've been known to stretch a metaphor. But I think the difference is, to sort of get back to your original question, the difference is the practice is always there to be accessed. It's just the focus now has become, because there is a sea of information that we can access, we are looking at a single datum point and forgetting that a practice is all about data collection and not this thing here.
Right. Well, and it's been really interesting for me as as I get older and as my coaching practice expands and my movement practice like shrinks,
Mm.
right? My movement practice is much smaller than it's ever been. I had an injury in my like late 20s, early 30s that I kept up a movement practice that was really hurting me for a little longer than I should have. And now have like really happily been like, oh, it's possible to have a movement practice that doesn't hurt me. It's just not in the air anymore, you know?
I think that's where the focus, I had an era where I was really, really interested in sustainability. And in my essay, I talk about, I'm pretty sure that circus is as accessible as we decide we're going to make it, because that is movement to humans. And that's a decision we make. And as you say, your practice has become smaller. I'm assuming you mean in like quantity or time, but you get closer towards like, what is the purpose of my practice? What does it give me? Is there something within it? This question that I always ask my students now about sustainability. It's not something that you can stamp onto a product afterwards and say, yep, EPA, check, 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 stamped with sustainability. You can't generate that post hoc. You have to have a look at what is there something that sustains me now? And if it sustains you now, it is sustainable practice. And that is
Yeah.
such a different way of looking at things, rather than going, I'm going to plan to sustain this practice, and if I can't, I've failed the expectation and I've failed.
Well, and
No joy.
it's so interesting as I think about my teaching practice. Every practice that I have in my life that is not my teaching practice costs me something,
Mm.
right? When you say sustainable, it's kind of like there's the implication that one of the things that we mean by sustainable is that the cost of the thing is low enough that I can pay it forever. And all of my practices are true in that they cost me something, with the exception of my teaching practice, which
Mm.
is for me like if I am not teaching something, if I do not have a coaching practice, if I'm not teaching handstands for at least 5 hours a week, the absence of teaching begins to draw my energy out, right?
Yeah.
Like teaching is actually something that fills me back up in the sense that it sustains me. My
Yeah.
teaching practice is a value add, is an energy add to
Mm.
me. And I can't imagine, like the most miserable portion of my life there was about 2 months in COVID of really intense lockdown where I was only teaching online and I was only teaching 2 hours a week. And it was too little. It like physically hurt me to
Yeah.
be coaching that little.
Well, that focus on finding something, how can you sustain something that already sustains you? That is the
Right.
question you need to ask. And so for me, like, I've had so many injuries, but I've learned that this practice is for me. Aerial Canvas Online in 2017, I created it for me so that I could
Right.
stay in touch with 4 students in Australia. I did all that work, not for them.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, for them, but really it's for me. And it
Right.
continued to be that all through the pandemic, especially my teaching practice. sustained me. And in order to teach, I have to have a movement practice to speak of that I can share. That's what sustains me. So the question becomes, how do you sustain something that already sustains you? And sometimes you need a little bit less of a practice in order to notice what those things are.
Yeah. And for me, the way that that relates to like discovery or invention or tradition or evolution or like any of the things we're talking about is, and I think one of the ways or reasons that we connect, and one of the ways or reasons that I started a writing practice on these essays, and one of the reasons I'm excited to have a kind of conversation practice with you this year, is that there is there's something to having a partner in practice that excites me, right? And whether that partner is a coach or a peer or whatever that partnership is, there's something about practice that exists in isolation that just goes in its own loop over and over and over again, and can sometimes be hard to get new ideas in, or sometimes hard to articulate new things. And this is sort of where the end of our essays are, is like, why do I have a value towards process or towards discovery or towards invention or evolution as opposed to a value towards imitation? And where, like, I'm not interested in doing teacher training or in coaching so that people learn to do things the way that I do it. I'm interested in having other people who are as involved in their coaching process as I am talk to me about what they're learning about their coaching processes, right?
Mhm.
And if part of that is everyone together sharing a language about how we talk about teaching movement so that we can have conversations with each other about why it's important for society, why it's important for culture, why it's important for us as coaches or individuals. Like, if we need to establish communities and language in order for that to happen, then great. But I am actually selfishly in this conversation to learn more about myself, not to create people who are interested in like teaching the way that Adam teaches. I don't want anyone else in the world to teach the way I teach. I don't think anyone else could, not because I'm the best, but because I'm like a very particular form of broken, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And only teaching makes you a better teacher. But I think the more you teach, the more you realize that you're just a student. And I think, like with some of the NLP stuff that you've introduced me to, I've realized, like, I created Aerial Canvas Online because I believed it was the thing that didn't exist when I was learning. So absolutely,
Ah.
self-questions. I was like, how would I, a self-directed, pretty conscientious, pretty disciplined person, but ultimately curious the most about expressive artistic movement, who really doesn't care about the degree of difficulty, how would I have learnt enough vocabulary to develop, to be able to speak this language that I fell on aerial by way of cirque. I came from gymnastics to cirque. I was not an aerialist in cirque. I was a flyer, as a specific circus tradition. So when I developed those 8 levels of syllabus on Lyra, that was my foray into the final stage of learning, which is teaching, and taught myself essentially so much content in order to be able to teach it to the adult population. And I think always finding that thing that keeps you interested is the thread, the sentiment, the meaning, the what it means for you. But I also ask my students a lot, what is it that makes you want to share? When you, even if it's like, oh, I'm going to post on Instagram, where does that urge come from? What's underneath that desire to share? And I think what you're talking about in isolated practice, as a teacher, it sort of can look like getting really sick of the sound of your own voice, or really upset that you constantly overplan and underdeliver or underprepare, and whatever it is that is frustrating to you about your practice, or whether it's other students or all that kind of thing. The thing that happens in isolation is that you're not sharing. And so when we talk about invention, as if I'm sure that, at the same time in India right now, someone is discovering something that I have discovered yesterday, that it's happening at the same time all around the world. The thing that makes it cool is if I'm in the presence of another body, my body is wanting to talk to that body. And that's that bodily knowledge that I talk about. When the information becomes bodily knowledge, you can't help but want to share it. And then
Yeah.
you see someone else's version of it and you're like, that's a cool way to pronounce buffet. What the heck is this buffet?
Buffet. Do you have any parting words of wisdom? The essay that you wrote ends with this, which might be a place to end, which is how can we? I'll just read the whole last paragraph, and then we can pick what part we want. If there's one thing, this is your writing. If there's one thing I think circus movement education offers over other forms of movement, it is that we, the movers, get to decide on both the form and the function. In my practice, I ask myself, what movement problem am I trying to solve, and how will my body move in order to solve it? In other words, as Adam, that's me, concludes in his essay, how can I physically embody the change that I want to see in the world? How do we bring the change that we see in the world?
Well said. Bien
Well
dit.
said, girl. It was a pleasure. This was a lot of fun. And I will see you next month.
Yeah, I look forward to the conversation.
It's really fun, I think, to have a conversation with someone who's literally on the other side of the world. We're on opposite seasons and opposite times of day, and we've still managed to connect and build a friendship, and I'm excited to continue chatting with her throughout the year. If you read any of the essays or have any thoughts of your own that you want to share with Rach and I, then please send us an email or a message, and we'd love to include other people in the conversation as well. So let me know what you think. Send me an email, reread the essays, get your brains moving, and I'm excited to continue the conversation with you through 2026.